Welcome to Murder Maven's True Crime Stories, where mystery meets creativity. We are two friends with a shared love for true crime and crafting, and in each episode, we'll take you on a chilling journey through a gripping true crime tale while we get crafty making cards. Whether you're tuning in to watch or just here for the story, we've got you covered. Just a heads up, some of the topics we discuss may be disturbing, so please listen with caution. Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and join us for an unforgettable blend of suspense and art.
Hello and welcome everybody to Killer Cards episode 4. This is a true crime podcast featuring crafting by Wendy and myself. And tonight's story is going to be all about Alex Murdaugh. So I've got a poll going on in the live chat. If you're joining us live, hello and welcome. Thanks for saying hi. And let us know in the live chat. Have you heard about Alex Murdaugh? Did you follow the trial, or do you know nothing about this case? Because we're about to tell you some crazy things, friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, Wendy and I are going to both be crafting, but we're going to trade off crafting while we tell you about Alex Murdaugh. So if you're watching, you're going to see us craft. And if you're just listening, you're just going to hear us talk about this true crime story. If you're interested in seeing what it is we're crafting with, Wendy and I both update the description box with the supplies that we're using. But otherwise, we're not going to talk crafting. This is all about true crime. Welcome, friends. I see Lori in the chat. Meg is here. Tracy is here. Creative Test Art is here. Welcome. Shawnee is here. Hi, friends. We are, this is a new channel, so if you could help us by hitting that like button and sharing it out, maybe sharing it to perhaps other friends of yours who like true crime, it will definitely help the YouTube algorithm and get us on the radar of other true crime fans. So welcome to all of our Mavens. Hi, Tracy. Welcome. And so I've got Wendy. Hi, friend.
Hi. Hey, Lynn.
How
Hey,
are you
Mavens.
doing?
I'm good. How is everybody? I hope everyone's doing good. I am so sorry I didn't get to be here for the Karen Reed case, but I was doing something fun. I am now a certified background investigator for law enforcement. So that's really exciting, and we can definitely field some questions on that before we get rolling here into our episode. Um, and yeah, so I'm kind of dipping my toe into the criminal justice world just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, and gonna see where that takes me, where that leads, and of course, crafting while I do that.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So I did, Teresa says, wow, holy wow, congratulations. Meg says, wow, congratulations. Lori says, awesome, Wendy, congrats. Tracy says, well done, Wendy, that's so exciting. Yes, so I did, without giving it away, I did tell folks last week that you were not able to join for a very good reason. I didn't want to spoil the surprise.
Yeah.
But
Um,
well, you can tell us a little bit about it if you would like as we wait for folks to come in. But
sure.
it's really exciting. I'm like blown away that you've taken this step. Um, did you enjoy the class?
So it's very interesting. The class itself was really like watching paint dry with the instructor. I mean, I hope he never watches this video, but or maybe he should maybe he should watch this video. I mean, really nice guy, works for the Department of Justice, but incredibly like some people can't teach. That is what I learned for sure from this class. Like, I was like, "Oh, I'm a pretty good teacher because this is what it's like when somebody can't teach." And he had all the content, but it was just very disorganized, and I was like, "He really needed a Maven to come in and help him organize this content." But so anyway, it that part of it was pretty rough, but the best part of it, and by the way, you guys, if if you guys can tell me what my sound is like, because when I listen to the playback, me and Lynn sound so different because I'm using an AirPod. It might be better sound if I just ditch the AirPod. So if you think that I'm not sounding great, can you just chat in and tell me? And I am working on figuring out sound and camera and all the things. Okay, sound is good. Jennifer says sound is good. All right. So, anyway, so back to the class. So the class was held at a place we call it. It used to be an Air Force base, and now it is a kind of like public safety center where they teach a lot of classes to law enforcement and stuff. So the class was comprised of pretty much all law enforcement, either current duty or retired. There was one other gal that was not law enforcement, and she works in the criminal investigations department of toxic substance control for state of California. And we actually became friends. Like we'd been texting and stuff and staying in touch.
Oh, cool.
And there was a whole group of us. That was me and her and a bunch of these law enforcement guys that ended up like going to lunch every day together. And we just had that was the best part of the whole thing was the networking, which is so funny because isn't that the case with like card making stuff too? Like the best part of every event, if you go to an event, like I went to the Honeybee Stamps anniversary, the best part of that event was the people. Like networking, visiting, hanging out with other people. So I got to know a few different guys. Actually, a chief of police for a town. I'm not going to give any specifics on where anybody was from because I that just feels like I shouldn't, even though no one said I couldn't. It's for just for good measure. But the chief of police from this small town in the Bay Area was there, and he has actually been retired and came back to law enforcement, and then he's retiring again probably at some point in the next couple of years. And so he thought he would take this class because what I have found out is most people that are background investigators are retired law enforcement because once you have in the state of California, once you have received a CalPERS retirement, you can't work and get you can't work for you have to work as a retired annuitant. So you can't work somewhere where you would get a retirement again. Does that make sense?
Um,
So most
oh,
law
like, okay, I see what you're saying. Like if a
so
pension or something,
yes,
or
so most law enforcement can retire at 50. So in California, by the way, everything is that I'm talking about is in the state of California. So I'm just going to say that now so I don't have to keep saying in California, in California. So in the state of California, most law enforcement can retire at the age of 50 because it's not really a job you want to keep doing for,
hmm.
there's a time limit on how long you should be in law enforcement. And So basically what happens though is at 50, I mean, people still have a lot of life left in them, and a lot of these guys still want to do stuff. So they'll do part-time work for different agencies. They'll do background investigating. Some of them do like event law enforcement. So they're not on normal payroll. But for example, I met a guy who works for two different enforcement agencies, but only is part of their event police. So when they have big events at the stadiums like 49ers games and stuff like that, he works that for that law enforcement agency. So it's kind of interesting, getting to meet all of those people and go through the class. And so I passed the test. I am certified. So if you wanted to
Yay.
be a background investigator for like just privatized stuff, you don't have to do this. I only had to get this certification because I'm doing it for law enforcement. So there's a
Oh.
regulatory thing called POST in California, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training. And essentially, that entity governs how peace officers, like the rules and regulations and laws for peace officers. And so you have to be certified through POST in order to perform background investigations on peace officers, because all of my investigative stuff will be it will be auditable by the state.
Mhm.
So you have to follow certain laws and guidelines and stuff like that. So anyway, that's what it is. That's what I'm going to be doing part-time, and doing this part-time, and yeah. So that's what's happening.
That's so exciting. So for folks who just came in and missed the news, Wendy just got certified to be a background investigator. It took all of the week during the Karen Reed episode. So that's why Wendy wasn't able to join us for that episode. I had mentioned that there was a really good reason, and that's the really good reason. So it's going to be really fascinating. Of course, she's not going to really be able to talk about like the cases that she's actively working on, but I think it's going to be her experiences will really lend a different perspective as she tells her stories. And with Killer Cards, it's really fun to do this with a partner in crime because Wendy is really fascinated about the people element of the crime and, you know, what compels
And
people to
the
do these things.
Yes, and the law enforcement side of the crime. Like, what does the how does law enforcement conduct interviews? What kinds of things do they do to find out the truth? Like, that is what's extremely fascinating to me. I mean, I like the law side of it afterwards, like the trial and all of that, but it's not the thing that, like, I'm obsessed with. So I think Lynn and I complement each other well with that, because I'm, like, really fascinated and interested in all the things that lead up to going to trial. And then once they're in trial, it's fun to know, like, okay, well, what happened, or it's, interesting. But it's more the police work behind the scenes and the what drives the person to do what they've done that I'm most often curious about.
Yeah, and I think it's a great compliment that we're getting to do this podcast together because of that reason. So, as
Yeah.
we go, Wendy's going to tell you the story of the crime, what has transpired, and I'll be crafting while she tells the story. And then when essentially the investigation is sort of, that's where we start the handoff, and I'll tell you about the trial and what happened afterwards and whether justice was served. So welcome, Lauren and Dawn. You guys aren't late. We've just been chit-chatting just to get Lauren caught up. Wendy got her certification to be a background investigator. So we're celebrating and super excited by it. All right, friends. So from the poll, it does look like about 2/3 of the folks here watching live are at least familiar with the case that we are going to be talking about. Alex, so I think, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, is it Murdaugh?
It is Murdaugh. It's really what I call him is Murdaugh because because he is kind of a scoundrel. But but it's Murdaugh. It's very like that G is very soft because I kept having to really listen. Are they saying Murdaugh or Murdaugh? And it there is that G at the end, but it's very soft.
Okay.
So,
All
you want to
right.
get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it. We don't have a
Okay.
clip for
We
today,
we
so
don't.
we're gonna
We
dive
don't.
in.
Yeah, we're just gonna dive in.
Okay.
And that's partly my fault because, Lynn asked me, "Do we have a clip?" And I was like, "Oh, let me look into it." And then my day has just been a crap storm, so there's that. Um, so let's kind of jump in, and I'm gonna just start telling you this story. So it starts more than 2 years before the murders. So we're talking about the murders of, Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, and 2 years before the murders, in February of 2019, 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh was involved in a tragic boating accident that claimed the life of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. Paul, allegedly drunk and belligerent, was driving the family boat when it crashed into a bridge pilling near Paris Island, South Carolina. Mallory's body wasn't found for a week. The Beach family blamed Paul, and the incident drew sharp public scrutiny, not just for his reckless behavior, but for how local authorities handled the investigation. Whispers of special treatment followed the Murdaugh name like a shadow. So in April of 2019, Paul was officially charged with 3 felony counts, including boating under the influence causing a death. His court date was slow to arrive, which was not shocking to me, but the pressure was never eased. The Murdaugh family, now under a microscope, and Paul in particular, was receiving death threats and harassment online. By early 2021, Alex Murdaugh, Paul's father, was facing a different kind of storm. As a partner in a powerful law firm, he was dealing with serious financial issues, and investigators later uncovered years of alleged embezzlement. But at the time, to the outside world, it was just a quiet rumor. Nobody really knew about this for sure. So, before we get into any further into kind of the events of June 7th, 2021, I want to talk just a little bit more and build a scene for you a little bit more. So on the slide here, you see where it says, "Are you above the law?" The reason I chose to name this slide this is because Alex Murdaugh was the third generation, I believe. It was either third or fourth. Now I can't remember off the top of my head, of attorneys in this area in South Carolina that were prosecutors. So he had a very long line of that, the epitome of what I would consider like that old, rich, Southern family that was kind of dangerous, in my opinion. There, as we talk through this, we're going to talk more about some other folks because there's way more to this than just the murders of June 7th. So essentially, to kind of build to understand why this might have happened and what investigators ended up finding out is there was millions of dollars embezzled from clients, staged insurance frauds, and connections to multiple suspicious deaths. So, what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to break down the events that led to the downfall of this guy who seemed untouchable. And then we'll look at the key players in the crimes and the courtroom drama, and Lynn will go over all of that. So, go ahead, Lynn, and go to the next slide for me. So first I want to talk about each victim. So this is really important to me, and I felt like, Lynn, you did an excellent job of highlighting the death of John O'Keefe last week, because I think that, or on our last call, I think that one of the things that happens a lot with true crime is we focus on the person who committed the act of violence, and we don't talk enough about the victims and really share about how their lives have been affected, or the people around them have been affected. So these are a list of mysterious deaths that surrounded the Murdaughs. So in 2015, Stephen Smith was a friend of Buster Murdaugh. So to build out this story, Alex and Maggie are married. They're a married couple, been married for a long time, and they have two sons, Buster and Paul, who basically get anything they want handed to them on a silver platter. They live in this big, beautiful southern mansion, and they don't have a lot of accountability growing up, is how I view it. So in 2015, Stephen Smith, whose photo here is at the bottom, he's a friend of Buster Murdaugh. He was found dead on the side of the road, presumably hit by a vehicle. However, there was all kinds of extenuating circumstances around his death that really lent itself to the idea that Buster had something to do with this, and it was covered up.
And how old was Buster at the time?
I do not remember. He was young. I want to say he was 15 or 16.
Yeah, because I mean, was he driving? Was he the one driving, or?
I don't remember. I didn't focus too much on these extra cases because of our time limit here. So I didn't go deep into detail with the extras because we have a lot to cover with the murder of Paul and Maggie.
Yeah.
And there's no way to know 100% for sure. Like Gloria Satterfield is another one. In 2018, she was their housekeeper, and she was found dead at the bottom of their stairs in the Murdaugh home after slipping and falling. And she was extremely close to Paul, the youngest son. And essentially it was covered up like she had a heart attack or something. There's later been lots of stuff that has come out about all of these mysterious deaths surrounding this family, and we can get into that in a little bit, but I'm going to get through all of these, and then I'll get through the timeline, and then we can go back and revisit the deaths and what we know now about some of the other folks in this. Because ultimately, Alex didn't go to prison for the deaths of anyone except Paul and Maggie. Not to spoiler alert, but that's Paul and Maggie are the ones that he actually got charged for. So then in 2019, Mallory Beach was thrown overboard and killed in a boating accident with Paul drunk at the wheel. And even in that case, like, as soon as this incident happened, Alex and his father, I think Randolph is his name, showed up at the hospital and were telling everybody that they were the family lawyers and that Connor was the one driving, which was another friend that was in the boat, which was not true at all. So there was just all of this immediate scuttlebutt that was caused by the Murdaughs, like trying to cover it up. Things were not investigated properly because the DA and the sheriff's office, like everybody, they kind of had everyone in their pocket, you know? And so essentially a lot of things got missed and not taken care of. For example, on the night that that happened, the boyfriend of Mallory Beach, who was really crazy about her, wanted to go down to the boating accident to look and see if he could figure anything out. And the police would not let him go by and said, it's a crime scene. It's, you know, nobody can go down there. It's, you know, absolutely not. And then Mallory's parents came and they wanted to go down there and they wouldn't let them. They would not let them go by. The police wouldn't. Alex Murdaugh shows up with his dad, and they allowed him and his dad to go down and pass the police tape and go down. So that's the kind of stuff that went on with these people. Um, so then in 2021, Paul and Maggie were found
Well,
by
can I
Alex.
interrupt for a
Yep.
sec?
Yep.
Is that because, though, that like normally a prosecutor would be allowed at a crime scene and the people checking might, just to give, as much benefit of the doubt as possible, but devil's advocate,
I think
because a
that
prosecutor would normally be allowed to go
I think
to.
that normally that would be the case, but when it's your son that has involved in the accident, I would think that
Right,
it
but
would be
then
the
would the
opposite.
cops have necessarily have known that, though? Like,
Oh, I am certain.
if they're just told, "Protect this crime scene," and they don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they knew because it's a small community and everybody knew who they were. I mean, even the people that illegally served Paul that night at the lakeside bars, they knew who he was. So he would use one of Buster's old IDs on a regular basis to get into places, and everybody knew. So it's the kind of community. I guess I personally understand the dynamics of this because I live in a community like this. I live in a really small rural community and everybody knows everybody. So I can understand how this I mean, I've witnessed myself how there's some people in our community that gets preferential treatment in different scenarios because maybe they're a big name in our community. They donate or fundraise a lot for maybe certain entities. So they get some preferential treatment. Even as a city council member myself, like I was offered free tickets to an event because like they offer that to all the city it's
Yeah.
not just me, it's like all the city council members. So you kind of get like this little extra treatment maybe that you wouldn't get if you were not a council member or a police chief or
Mhm.
maybe a large contributor or donator to something. So um anyway, so as we move to 2021, and in that case, that's the case we were talking about earlier in 2019, Paul was charged with felonies for that. So in 2021, Paul and Maggie are found by Alex, shot to death on their property. So that's his youngest son and his wife. So if we want to move to the next slide, we can start talking about the timeline of events. And by the way, all of these are going to be downloadable. I think Lynn provides a link so that you guys can download the slides if you want to look at them at a later time. Just ignore any typos. Because sometimes I have typos. So June 7th, 2021 began like any other summer day at the Murdaugh estate, known locally as Moselle. So sometimes if you're hearing people talk about this case, they'll say Moselle. It's simply, that's just where they lived. That was their home. It's a sprawling rural property in Colleton County. That night around 10:07 p.m., Alex Murdaugh called 911. He's quoted saying, "I need the police and an ambulance immediately. My wife and son have been shot badly." And it goes on from there. Responders arrived to a horrific scene near the dog kennels on the property. Both Maggie, 52, and Paul, 22, were found shot to death. Paul had been killed with a shotgun, and Maggie shot multiple times with a semi-automatic rifle. It was brutal, execution style. In the hours and days that followed, Alex Murdaugh appeared to be a grieving father and husband. He told investigators, well, hold on one second. Let me go to the actual timeline for that night, and then we'll get into the other stuff. So around 8:30 p.m., we're going to back up a little. So at 10:07, he calls 911. So leading up to that evening at 6 p.m., Alex, Maggie, and Paul were going on about their routines. Paul had been out with his father visiting a sunflower field on the property to check on crops. He even posted a Snapchat video at 7:39 p.m. showing him riding around with a friend laughing. Maggie had reportedly been staying at the family's beach house. She was asked by Alex to come back to Moselle that evening. She initially resisted, texting a friend that Alex was acting, quote, fishy, but ultimately decided to go. So right there, I feel like that is a huge tip-off that we possibly, that this is premeditated. He had a plan. So at 8,
I can't remember. Were they having marital problems? Were they separated,
yes,
divorced?
they weren't separated or divorced, but they were having a lot of marital problems, which all surrounded the money. I don't think she even knew how bad it actually was, but there was so much embezzlement and crafty stuff happening, and we'll get back into that when we talk about some of the other cases, because like Gloria Satterfield, Alex convinced her children that he would take care of their insurance stuff, and then they never saw any money from the insurance claim, and he pocketed it all. So there's all kinds of fraud and horrible things that have happened around this family. So 8:30 p.m., they're having, quote, family time at the dog kennels. Paul and Maggie were at the dog kennels on the property. Paul took a video. This was a key piece of evidence. Paul took a video of a friend's dog concerned about its tail injury. It had so these dogs are kept in kennels far from the house. They're hunting dogs. So they're not like your dogs that cuddle up with you at night on the couch. These are hunting dogs kept in a kennel, and they have a job and a purpose. So they're not
house pets.
They're not house pets. And they're also, in my feeling, is that they're not regarded in a way you would regard a house pet. They're kind of looked at like what would be the word? A commodity, like an asset. They're not
like a tool,
cheap.
like
yeah,
equipment or something.
Yes, and they're not cheap either. They're expensive dogs. So, he had a friend's dog there, and the friend was concerned about a tail injury. So that video was retrieved from Paul's phone later, and it became a really crucial piece of evidence, because in the background of that video, and this is important to remember, this is at 8:30 p.m., you can hear the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex. So we do know that Alex was at the dog kennels at 8:30 p.m., even though he told detectives later that he was never there. So that's at 8:30 p.m. So from 9 to 9:06 p.m. is when we think is the window of death. You can move to the next slide, Lynn. So according to the forensic data, Maggie and Paul were murdered between 9 and 9:06 p.m. Paul was shot first, twice, with a shotgun. The second shot was the fatal shot, striking him in the head. Maggie was killed moments later, shot multiple times with a .300 Blackout semi-automatic rifle. Her body was found only a few feet away from Paul's. And I just want to take a second in this moment to say, I cannot imagine the horror that those few moments of Maggie's life, like, it can almost bring me to tears, because I have a child. Watching your husband shoot your child in the face, like, I cannot fathom what those few minutes of her life must have been like. So I think that it's just important for us to humanize this, because we always talk so much about all of these, crimes and murders, and everybody watches it, and I think that we dehumanize it, or we get desensitized to how horrific. And I'm a pretty empathetic person. Like, I feel things pretty deeply, and so I can't even fathom what that moment in time would have been like for her. And honestly, as a mom, I can say that I probably would have been happier to not be alive anymore than to have to live with that moment the rest of my life. Um, so that is from a very small window, 6 minutes. So from 9:06 to 10:06, this is what investigators have called the missing hour. This is where things get really murky. For nearly an entire hour of the estimated time of death, from the estimated time of death, Alex Murdaugh's movements are totally unclear. He later tells investigators that he had gone to visit his mother, who suffers from Alzheimer's, at her home in Alameda. But investigators found inconsistencies in his alibi. Phone data showed limited movement, and there were no calls made to Maggie's phone after her death until much, much later, which is always like a key sign that something's odd. So at 10:07, go ahead to the next slide, Lynn. At 10:07 is when that 911 call comes in. Alex Murdaugh calls, "I've been gone. I just came back. My wife and child have been shot badly." So he makes sure, this is an odd thing to say in a 911 call. He makes sure to start out with his alibi. So a normal response in that situation, according to what I've learned from detectives and investigators in this case and other cases, a normal response in that situation is not to establish your alibi. You are so in shock that basically all you're saying is like, my family is dead. I need help. I need help. I need help. Like, there's no, I was gone. I just got here. There's none of that, because a person who doesn't have a reason to try to establish an alibi, that is not in the forefront of their mind. They are just simply stating, I need help immediately. So he told dispatchers that he found their bodies near the dog kennels. Deputies arrived shortly after. The scene was grisly. The victims were already dead. Alex appeared distraught. There were no signs of forced entry, no weapons recovered at the scene, and no suspects, immediately anyway. So at 11 o'clock, by the time investigators fully processed the crime scene, suspicion had begun to simmer, quietly but steadily. There were no tire tracks, no defensive wounds, and no signs of a struggle. Everything about the murders suggested something personal, something close. So that is essentially the crime and what happened the night of June 7th. And then I have notes here. I have notes, folks. Let me go through. Okay, there's that. Yep. Okay. So, after the murder happens, the investigation turns kind of towards Alex, right? We're starting to feel like after the murders of Maggie and Paul, the initial investigation focused, like most do, on the immediate family. So I'm just going to share this little tidbit because I think this is funny. I was watching we'll lighten the mood for a moment and then we'll go back to the seriousness. So I was watching something on Instagram, and it was a meme of this young girl who clearly really loved true crime, and she was giving a speech at her sister's wedding, and she's the maid of honor, and she turns to her sister and her new brother-in-law, and she says, "I want you both to," she's saying all these sweet things, and she says, "Now I would like for you both to turn and look at each other and look into each other's eyes. And I want you to realize that the person you're looking at is the person most likely to murder you statistically." And
That's so dark.
The whole crowd just erupts in laughter. And it's not funny, but it's true, right? It's like, it's the truth. Like, they're statistically, that is why law enforcement always looks at the family first. They look at the spouse, they look at siblings, they look at parents. They want anybody or children, anybody who was close to the person who has been killed, because it's most likely that person. And most often it's the spouse. I mean, that's just the case. So Um, so anyway, the investigation turns and focuses on the immediate family. But this wasn't just any family, remember? The Murdaughs were basically legal royalty in South Carolina Low Country. For nearly a century, they controlled the 14th Judicial Circuit, prosecuting crimes by day and defending high-profile clients by night. But once the curtain was pulled back, what investigators found was a mess of financial crimes, lies, suspicious deaths that had all been swept under the rug for years. In the weeks following the murders, authorities grew increasingly interested in Alex Murdaugh himself. His stories had holes everywhere. His alibi was extremely questionable, and the way the crime scene was staged didn't make any sense. Pressure was mounting from the public and the press. If this could happen to the Murdaughs, what else had been gone unchecked? So that's something that I think we see come up a lot in situations like this where law enforcement has like maybe done something shady or prosecutions have done something shady. We see this a lot where then people start questioning like, well, wait a minute, if this is an issue or if this has happened, what else has happened? In fact, I'm rewatching the Netflix documentary right now, Making a Murderer. And if you have not watched that, I highly recommend it if you want to see what corrupt law enforcement can look like. It's absolutely horrifying. So I would recommend that one for sure. But anyway, a lot of times with these types of cases, that's what you see is you start seeing like, okay, well, now we've got questions about this or that. And here's another big issue. When you have somebody who's done something like this, it then brings up all, and maybe Lynn, you could touch on this some more later, but it also brings up legitimacy to all their past prosecutions because were they doing things, were they credible? So turning to the background investigation thing, something I can share is that when a law enforcement person is coming to apply to become a peace officer and they go through their background, we in California, we have to read them a statement. The investigator has to read them a statement that essentially says, if you lie, you're going to get disqualified. So it is better to just tell the truth. Like whatever it is, however bad it makes you look, whatever you're embarrassed about, it's better to just be honest about it and tell the truth than it is lie about something. Because you're also going to have to take a polygraph. So if your polygraph or your CVSA doesn't match up to my investigation, then there's going to be problems. So the reason that they're so adamant about the lying is because if you kick the can down the road and this police officer gets hired and then a murder happens and he has to testify, that defense attorney has access to go back and look at his background investigation. And if they find out he lied in his background, he's no longer a credible witness. So it's super, super important that even from the background investigation that they're upfront and honest, even if it's something unsavory. So that's kind of the same with this case is now you're able to call into question everything else Alex has done if he's willing to do this and lie like he has. So I'm going to talk now just a little bit about some of the other cases, or the other crimes related to him, and then I'm going to turn things over to Lynn. So Gloria Satterfield they basically reopened her case because, like I just said, now we're calling into question everything, right? So in September of 2021, another bombshell drops. Authorities reopened the investigation into the 2018 death of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper. She had died reportedly after that fall I mentioned earlier on the family's front steps. At the time, her death was ruled natural and no autopsy was performed. But in the wake of these murders, questions come flying back. Why was Alex the one who encouraged her sons to sue him for a wrongful death claim? And where did the settlement money go? Turns out Alex pocketed over $4 million that was meant for Gloria's family. Stephanie Smith's death. Then another case. In 2015, a 19-year-old nursing student named Stephen Smith, sorry, I said Stephanie earlier, Stephen Smith, was found dead in the middle of a rural road just miles from the Murdaugh estate. Officially, his death was attributed to a hit and run, but from day one, that never sat right with his family or with the investigators. After the 2021 murders, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also called SLED, announced that new evidence had emerged linking Stephen's death to the Murdaugh investigation. Then the financial crimes come to light. And as all of this is unfolding, a massive financial scandal comes to light. Alex Murdaugh was accused of stealing millions from his clients, many of them vulnerable, injured, or grieving. He allegedly created fake bank accounts, forged documents, and manipulated settlements. This was an isolated error. This was not, an isolated error. It was systemic. The same man trusted with seeking justice had been using his influence to exploit the very system he once upheld. The murders of Maggie and Paul weren't just an isolated tragedy. They were the thread that, when pulled, unraveled generations of unchecked power. The deeper investigators looked, the more they found. Fraud, deception, suspicious deaths, and a growing suspicion that a man at the center of it all wasn't just grieving, but hiding. So that is your overview of the crimes surrounding Alex Murdaugh. These folks are despicable. And I'm just going to say, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I don't think Maggie was a saint either. I think she was pretty, like when Mallory Beach was killed, she made sure to cozy up to Mallory's mom and did some things that were unsavory. And so
Oh, really?
yes, it wasn't just Alex. I think that their power and their money was
Made them feel entitled.
made them feel entitled. The kids, her and him. I obviously, and ultimately there were some things surrounding the crime with killing Paul and Maggie, like insurance claims and stuff like that. Essentially, what I think was his motivation for murdering them was that he was in trouble for all these other financial things. Because, by the way, that was already happening. So the financial stuff was already kind of being brought to light before this murder happened. And he had already was facing stuff in court and stuff like that. So I think that he knew all this stuff was going to come out and he needed money. I think he was out of money and he needed money, and they had life insurance. And I think that that's how he saw it as his option out, which just boggles my mind. So I have way more details about the evidence and the crime and all of that. But I think because it's already 5:00, we're going to go ahead and let Lynn jump into the legal side of things and the court case. And then I certainly will jump in and add in any tidbits from original evidence findings as well. If we want to do it that way.
Yeah,
that works for you.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna do a little switcheroonie here, and Wendy is going to begin crafting.
I am. I promise.
Will talk about the trial. Okay, so during the trial, let's give just a quick overview of where we are up till now. What was Alex actually charged with? So he's charged with 2 counts of murder, one each for his son and his wife, and 2 counts of possession of a weapon in commission of a violent crime. In terms of the overall timeline of things, so as Wendy mentioned, but I kind of like to do this overview just so that folks, especially if you're not in the US, maybe our legal system's a little different to other legal systems, but it's a slow process and quite possibly made slower due to the influence of the Murdaugh family. But the commission of the crime was in July of 2021. Alex was not actually arrested until 2022. So it took a year, even though, he was a strong suspect, being the one who called it in, the only one there. But the trial didn't start until January of 2023. So about half a year from then. The trial itself was fairly quick. It only took a couple months, and there were lots of things that unfolded after the trial, which we'll get into, and even as we talk today, it's not 100% completely over and done with. But what happened? So Wendy did a really good job of kind of talking about the situation as this murder trial is underway. So the Murdaughs as a family were surrounded by a lot of legal troubles. Now, for Alex, that meant over 100 federal and state charges of financial crimes, which included fraud, money laundering, and um, these were at the moment charges, but not publicly like really made aware of. He wasn't in the middle of trial for any of it. A lot of these things were under investigation for a long, long time, and Alex certainly knew that he was being investigated for these financial criminal charges, but they hadn't yet made the public light just yet. And that kind of becomes important in the prosecution's case. And one of the things that some might say is kind of pivotal in the trial is the fact that the prosecution argued that while he had not been convicted of any of these criminal charges, that they should be allowed to bring it up in this case. And they won that motion. So oftentimes what happens is lawyers will make argument to the judge as it pertains to what type of evidence is should be allowed to come into the trial. And normally you can't hold what is commonly referred to as prior bad acts against a person because it tends to, we're humans, and so it kind of tends to like make people think, well, if they did this other bad thing, they must be a bad person, so then they must have done this bad thing that they are now on trial for. You're not allowed to do that. Juries are supposed to make a judgment on innocence or guilt dependent on the facts that they hear at trial, and they're not supposed to hold your prior offenses and bad acts against you as if it's evidence that you're more likely to have committed this one particular crime. And there are exceptions to that, but these two things are so very different. It would not have normally been allowed under some of those more standard exceptions, except for the fact that the defense kind of made a boo-boo and opened the door to these financial crimes coming in. And so the jury was allowed to hear about them. And then side note, he did eventually plead guilty to those crimes, but at the moment that the trial was going, he had not yet pled guilty to them. Now, Paul, just as Wendy described, he was under indictment for the death of Mallory Beach. Again, That's the boating accident where he was the one who was driving the boat. He was intoxicated. There was an accident, and she died as a result of the accident. And so he was being investigated for that, and that was publicly known. And like Wendy said, there was a lot of I mean, he was getting threats, and it was all looking very bad for the family. And so their public image, and they are such a high profile family. I'm sure their public image was something they really wanted to
And
protect.
I'm just gonna jump in here really quick, Lynn, because I want to add a note that I just thought of while you were saying that. That also was part of, I believe, the way that Alex thought he would get away with this is he used his when investigators talked with him when he got interrogated, basically, he was like, well, I don't know, he's getting all these death threats, maybe it was somebody excuse me, my voice just like went away. Maybe it was somebody related to Mallory's, essentially trying to blame it on somebody that's threatening him.
Right. I mean, he was trying to deflect
Yep.
and give somebody, give the police another suspect to try to run down. But there was a lot of legal problems that this family was under pressure and extreme scrutiny uh, while the trial was underway. So, what exactly was the prosecution's case? Well, nothing beats a confession. So, they do, I should say, because it still exists. They do have a recording of, interestingly, Alex Murdaugh was interviewed very casually. Like they didn't haul like he was interviewed a lot. So sometimes it was in a police station, but other times it was just like in the police car. This was one of many of the interviews conducted by police by SLED, and it was just captured by the dash cam of a police car. And you can click the link in the slide if you want to hear this and see for yourself or hear for yourself whether you agree that he said, quote, "I did him so bad," when he talked about his son, Paul, and what transpired that evening. And they took that to be, guilty conscience, maybe not so much of a confession, but it was, I think this particular interview was, it wasn't directly on that night of the accident. And so it kind of starts with that they did play that for the jury to hear. The prosecution, there are some things that they are kind of required to prove if they want a conviction for their case, and that is means they don't necessarily need to prove a motive, but it really helps a jury to understand like the why, the human nature of why would they do such a thing, right? It just helps it to be a little bit more believable, but certainly not something you have to prove. An opportunity. So means, motive, and opportunity. Well, in terms of means, Alex Murdaugh did have 20 plus guns. So Wendy kind of touched on this. They had hunting dogs. They hunt. Their property is large, and so they would invite even like friends over to hunt on their property. And
And I mean,
so,
these people even had their own plane. Like,
yeah, I mean, their home has a name, so
yeah, their
it's
home is its own entity.
it's big, the property, and you need like golf carts and whatnot to go from the kennel to the main house to wherever, right? So so he had guns aplenty. They did not on the night of the murders. They didn't
June
find the
7th.
murder weapons, but it would be just a matter of time they could look. But they knew that this was a home with guns. Motive. So Wendy mentioned this, the financial crimes that were being alleged that he might not have been, I think he was formally indicted or charged with these crimes. It just hadn't come out publicly just yet or hadn't made like big news yet. And so one of the things the prosecution alleged is that one of the motives for murdering his wife and son was to take attention away from those financial crimes and to
Yeah.
garner some sympathy from not just the public, but also from, you know, the people conducting the investigations, because that's how this family rolled, or that's at least how he rolled, in the sense that he could always talk, you know, police officers, etc. He could always talk them out of a ticket, out of this, that, or the other. This was a very well connected family. Like Wendy said, a long lineage of prosecutors going back generations. To underscore how big a deal this family is, in the courtroom where this case was being tried, they had to take down a painting portrait of Alex Murdaugh's like grandfather,
Yes.
father or grandfather,
Yep.
but somebody in the family, so that the jury would not attribute anything to that fact, whether it was that, hey, this is an important dude, and you know,
Right.
there's another dude with the name Murdaugh, you know, on the
Right.
wall. So good or bad, they just did not want that to influence the jury at all. And but that is how deeply connected the family is to the justice system. And so he was just very used to talking to people and, you know, getting his way, getting out of this, that, or the other, calling in favors here and there. He also rode around in his car with like a fake police badge, and it would like give people the because prosecution, I think, have some kind of badge that does allow them typically to, you know, have access to things like crime scenes and stuff. So so he would ride around with that, even though at some point his license or whatever was suspended, and he would get away with it left, right, and center. And so the prosecution alleged that, well, you know, one of the reasons why he did this was because he thought this would be another way to manipulate people into not digging any deeper into these financial crimes of this poor man who just lost his husband and son. And certainly for a little while, he was getting quite a lot of sympathy before he became, you know, suspect number one. So in terms of opportunity, cell phone data um, showed that Alex was, you know, folks, cell phones these days are becoming huge in trials, and have
Yes.
become very critical in a lot of things. It used to be, you know, DNA and everything was that was the new revelation, right? When we could do DNA testing and that things of that nature. Now, cell phone forensics are becoming huge, and so there's cell phone data that would show that Alex was actually on the property and not visiting and looking in, checking in on his mom, who has Alzheimer, and whose dad was also not well, so he would have to check in on both of his parents time to time. Wendy already mentioned the fact that Alex's voice is caught on a video that Paul recorded and shared out to, I think, social media, that actually puts him at the dog kennel, despite the fact that he had been denying from day one, from the jump, he had been denying ever being down at the dog kennel that day. The whole thing was that Maggie loves those dogs. She likes to play with those dogs. That's why she was at the kennel. Paul was out there tending to some sunflower fields that he was replanting, and that's why he was down there. But Alex
But let's
himself,
remember, Maggie wasn't even supposed to be there.
right? I mean,
Alex
Alex is the
convinced
one
her
who
to come
called,
back. Yep.
right? But not according to his recounting, right?
Right.
And that kind of comes down to the last point, which is that he's a big fat liar. Everything that comes out of that man's mouth is just all lies. I mean, this is really the prosecution's number one, takeaway, was he lied about all of these financial crimes. He lied about these families who were supposed to get settlements for civil cases that were won. He defrauded his own family practice of money, having clients pay him as opposed to the firm. He I mean, it was just ridiculous. I mean, one of the financial things was that I think one of the bank accounts that they have was called Forge something. He made a second bank account that was Forge something else, so that when checks were written out to Forge, if you didn't like really read the whole thing through, they were similar enough that it was just
He could get
cashed or
away with it.
whatever.
Right.
And so he would have people write it out to his fraudulent, what they called during the trial, fake Forge bank account. And that would be him. There were a couple of other people who were in on this with him who knew, and I believe they kind of turned on him essentially, and that's how a case was built against him ultimately. So one of the things that the prosecution kept really hammering on is that lying comes easily to this man. You know, he would get pulled over by some cops and he would just spout some lie in order to get out of it. He lied to his clients, he lied to his own family, and in their legal practice. And it also came out at trial that Alex hired a hitman to murder him on the side of the road in order so that his surviving son Buster would be able to claim his life insurance.
Yeah.
Presumably because he knew he was guilty of all of these financial crimes, and when he was found guilty, there would have to be reparations. He would have to pay that back. And so he just figured he's better off. He can't kill himself, I suppose, because then life insurance won't pay out. So it has to happen in a certain fashion in order for the life insurance to still pay out. So I think he hired like a cousin or something. The cousin was a bad shot, and he shot him, but it grazed his head, and Alex didn't die. So you can't even do that right. So that was the prosecution's case. So what does the defense have to say about this? Well, the defense said that, okay, first off, where's the murder weapon? Right? They never found the murder weapon. And ballistics would suggest that there were actually two different guns coming at two different angles. And that would suggest that there were two perpetrators who committed this crime. So, setting aside the fact that that they don't have the murder weapon, they can't tie the murder weapon back to Alex, it it just doesn't fit with the way that the prosecution is laying out what happened that evening. Like, they didn't even really talk about the logistics of how this crime was actually committed. And part of that is because on the evening of the event, the investigators really didn't do that great of a job collecting evidence, and it was raining, but they weren't really treating it like a crime scene because it was the Murdaugh family. And so part of the defense was that you don't really have, like, they don't have the evidence to really show any of this. All of their evidence is circumstantial, which is, the jury is allowed to convict on circumstantial evidence, but that is one of the defense's case or rebuttals to the prosecution's case.
But I think convicting on circumstantial is so much harder, because if you have a jury who really understands the law, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there's any reasonable doubt that this person didn't do this crime, you're really supposed to acquit them.
You are, but I don't think that always happens. I think
No,
people are
100%
still
not.
people, and so they're still governed by what they feel
Sure.
is justice, and that may not be legally, the definition of justice. And so they still claim that Alex was visiting his mom, that there was certainly no time, given the distance he had to drive and whatnot, for him to have committed these murders, and that I think they had some GPS that would show that he made that drive at least, but the timings probably weren't exactly like Alex said in terms of how long he was there, etc. The other thing was that he, when the police arrived, he was wearing a bright white t-shirt. You can see it because there's dash cam video footage of Alex being interviewed in the police car on the evening that this happened, and not a spot of blood on him. So he was wearing a white shirt. You would think that if he had just committed such a heinous crime and a very bloody one, that he would have some blood on him.
However, are you going to talk about the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think I am. So, but I'll say something and you can fill in if I'm not saying what you think. So, so that was what the defense was saying. Now, when he called 911, he told the 911 operator, what had happened, the address, all of this and that. And then he told her, okay, I'm going to run him up to the main house because I want to go grab a gun just in case, whatever. I don't know. But I guess, like, fill in the blanks, maybe give him some grace, benefit of the doubt. Maybe he thought people were still around and that he was afraid for his own safety, didn't want to be waiting there without being armed. So he told them, the 911 operator, he was going to go back to the house and grab a gun. So that explains him taking this golf cart or whatever, I think it's a golf cart or something similar, from the kennel to the main house, presumably to get a gun. Now, when his housekeeper was interviewed later on the stand, she did testify to the fact that there was like wet laundry in his bathroom. And so the prosecution is trying to kind of let the jury infer that, sure, he went back to the main house and maybe he did grab a gun, but he probably also cleaned up. And that's why he's got bright white shirt with no, blood or anything on it. Is that what you were thinking?
That's what I was thinking, but to piggyback on that, one of the things that came out in evidence too is that they talked about is that there's a video of him. Remember earlier in the day, Paul took a video when they were at the sunflower fields And in that video, he's wearing different clothes than he had on that night. So it all of that kind of is part of, yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you covered it, but that was another thing that they clearly knew he had changed his clothes at some point, which you could speculate was because the other clothes did have blood all over them.
Right. And so, finally, one of the things that I think a lot of people will say is maybe his downfall is that he did take the stand, and not everybody who is charged with a crime takes the stand, and they don't have to. They are presumed innocent. They don't have to prove anything. It's for the prosecution to prove that they have committed what is being alleged of them. But a lot of times people, just human nature will read into the fact that, hey, if you're not willing to take the stand and say it under oath, then you must have something to hide. Now, juries are instructed that that they shouldn't infer anything, but we're humans, right? We can be told something, but still carry our own biases and our own feelings. And so it's tough to really put that aside. But he did take the stand, and he was um, cross-examined by the prosecution. He was emotional, and he said directly, he was asked very directly from his lawyers, "Did you commit these crimes?" And he said under oath that he did not. And
Girl, did you watch that man on the stand?
I did. I'm just
Oh.
saying, he took the stand. whether or not he's believable or not, but he said it under oath, and that's what a lot of people want to hear, right? Is that because they're
Yeah.
gonna assume if he doesn't take the stand, I don't think a defendant can win uh, if they take the stand, but
That's why defense attorneys highly discourage it,
yeah,
is
but
because, yeah.
but I will say that it goes to show how much this man believed that he can talk himself out of anything,
Hmm.
because he thought that if he had a chance to just tell his side, that he could win everybody over. And so that was, I feel, a mistake on his part. But what did the jury think? So the jury deliberated for a whopping 3 hours and guilty on all charges. So he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Now, remember, he had all of those criminal financial charges levied against him. He did plead guilty to 22 state charges of financial crimes and sentenced to 27 years to be served concurrently with his murder sentence. And he also pled guilty to the federal charges of financial crimes and was sentenced to 40 years concurrent to both of the sentences preceding. And he was uh, charged, or I don't know what that legal term is, but he was made to pay 8.7 million in reparations.
Restitution.
Um, so one of the things that I didn't really touch on too much, but they did make this a point during the trial, was that Alex Murdaugh, the reason he was under all of these financial troubles is because he's a drug addict, and he was now, we're supposed to believe this man stole millions of dollars to fuel his drug addiction. I don't think you can take millions of dollars in any kind of drug.
He'd be
But
dead,
right, but that
especially in
was
that amount of time.
right, but that was one of the things that the defense kind of said, look, he's not a perfect man. He's gone to rehab, which he did, but he had all of these drug I guess loans or whatever to fuel this drug addiction that he's had. Well, they said that he's been fighting it his entire life. It's been a lifelong battle with drugs, and I don't know how believable any of that was, but even if you believe it, I don't really know how relevant it
Well,
came across anyways.
and I think that two things can be true at the same time. Like, he may have
True.
had a battle with, like, pills and stuff like that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's using all of that money for that.
Right, exactly. Now I think the people who were in the camp of yay, justice was served, got a little bit worried because there was some post-trial shenanigans that were, well, I should say there were trial shenanigans that were revealed after the conclusion of the trial. So Becky Hill is a name that was often spoke of after the trial, and not in a good way. She was the county clerk of court during Alex's trial, and she, as the county clerk, really her role and responsibility was to kind of keep an eye on the jury. If they needed to go to the restroom, escort them to the restroom, escort them from wherever their holding room is to the courtroom. She was just there to bring food, take orders, if somebody needed something, to get that thing for them, etc. And that's it.
I have a question. Was this jury sequestered? I don't remember.
No,
No. Okay.
I don't believe so. And so she had very limited responsibility as the clerk of court. However, it was revealed that she abused what little responsibilities she had. And her position, I believe, is an elected position. I could be wrong on that,
What
but
position is it? County.
the clerk of court.
Oh, yes, it's elected.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, she had to be liked enough to be voted in, but it also kind of shows and makes maybe a little bit of sense as to why she, I mean, I guess just abuse of power is just rampant in this area and all the people involved, because one could say that, on a different scale, but Alex Murdaugh was, with his financial crimes and just, overall how he held himself, it was all about abusing his power and reputation and status. And in whatever her sphere was, she was much like Alex Murdaugh, trying to do the same. And so she was levied with 76 counts of misconduct after a lot of things started to come out about her. And the big thing with regards to Alex's trial is jury tampering, because she's not supposed to talk with the jury, and the jury is not supposed to talk amongst themselves about the case until the closing arguments and they've gone back to deliberate. But she is back there planting seeds in their ears during the trial, meaning at one point, before Alex is about to take the stand, she tells them, okay, listen to him closely, and he's just full of lies. You really can't believe anything that he says. So she's like telling them things and trying to sway their impression of how the evidence is being laid out in front of them. And she's also giving tours of the court and everything to media, and taking kind of bribes and such money to do that. She's not supposed to be doing that. um, she also had a book deal, and so she was writing kind of a tell-all about the Alex Murdaugh case. And of course, the more salacious the trial and the more, I think his guilty outcome verdict would have played a little bit better for her book than a non-guilty verdict. And so there were a lot of things that kind of spoke to her motivation for why she felt so invested in Alex Murdaugh's conviction and guilty verdict. And so, largely the concern that the defense brought up was that, well, if she's there talking to the jury and tampering with the jury, then we need to have a new trial because she just kind of messed it all up because they were now no longer impartial because of her interactions with them. And on top of everything else, they wanted the judge on the trial, Judge Newman, to recuse himself because of his interactions with Becky Hill, and because when the guilty verdict came in, he kind of expounded a little bit and gave his personal opinion as to how he felt the jury really got it right, and that he believed that justice was served, and it kind of suggested that he was biased against Alex Murdaugh.
But
And
I have a question. Isn't that kind of common for judges to kind of give their opinion after the case is settled?
well, I don't know how common it is, but I think really they're just supposed to read the verdict and thank
Interesting.
thank the jury for doing their civic duty. I don't think they're supposed to be like, yeah, you got it. you know like, so they're really because the judge is supposed to just call balls and strikes, and they're not supposed to be rooting for an outcome. They're
Mhm.
just supposed to be rooting for justice to be served, and not really, certainly throughout the trial, not be putting a thumb on either scales, but also I think at the end they're not supposed to kind of give like commentary. I'm sure people do, but they're just supposed to say, okay, we're done, thanks. And
Thanks for your
yeah,
service. See you later.
pretty much, like, that's how when I've watched other, for example, the Maya trial, that judge was really great. I mean, he just said, look, and I think you could kind of tell, was starting to be a believer. At some point, I think he had his, skepticism, but by the end, I think he did agree with the jury, but you wouldn't really know it, when he dismissed them. And so the defense did motion for a new trial in January of 2024, and they were told nope. Even though Becky Hill should not have done all of those things, she was wrong to do them all. But there's a thing that they assess, which is, did her inappropriate actions result in like irreversible damage, meaning
Would the outcome have been different?
would the outcome, like, did it make a material difference? Would the outcome have been any different? Exactly. And the judge said no, there was sufficient evidence to have found him guilty, and so no new trial. So after that verdict, the defense filed an appeal in, I think, August of 2024. They filed that they were going to appeal, and then in December of 2024, they actually submitted their entire like appeal argument, and that is actually still under review. So it's not 100% done, but most appeals are, most of the time people don't win their appeal. But considering the fact that if we look at how much he's charged with, so I mean, he's already got 20. So besides the 2 life sentences, he does have 24 or 27, which is concurrent, and 40, which is concurrent. So really 40, even if you say, okay, maybe they redo the murder trial and he he gets lucky and he's found not guilty, he still has a 40-year sentence on the financial crimes. Though I guess, it might be worth it for him to fight for it because he could possibly get parole on the financial crimes. It's the life sentences with no parole sentencing from the murder trial that really means he's gonna pretty much, he's gonna spend the rest of his life in jail. But they're still fighting it, even though he has pled guilty to the financial charges. So, hi Madison, welcome. I'm late, but I made it. Well, I'm glad that you made it. And we're just wrapping up actually. So, but this is available on the replay for everybody who might have joined late. But this was, I would say, justice has been served. What do you think, Wendy?
Yes, I think that justice was served. I mean, there's really no other people that would have had an interest, especially in killing his mom. And the biggest thing to me that stands out with this crime is that Alex they were having marital issues, and he requested her to come back home. I found that extremely odd because they've been married a really long time, and I've been married a really long time. I mean, not probably as long as some of you, but we're coming up on 19 years this year. And if I went away on a weekend trip and my husband called me and like pushed for me to come back home, he wouldn't do that unless there was an emergency. Like there would have to be an extenuating circumstance for him to do something like that. So that, I mean, we always run stuff through our own lens, right? Of like, is that normal behavior? And I really thought about my husband in that it's just not normal behavior. Why would he insist for her to come back home? Especially if they're having marital problems. Wouldn't you be glad your spouse was gone? Like, stay longer than take the week. Don't come back this weekend, you know? And so to me, that was just a huge red flag. Um, so you have that, and then there were the 300 excuse me, the 300 blackout rifle. There was ammunition cartridges near Maggie's body, and they matched markings from spent shells found out at the shooting range on the Murdaugh property. And so that suggested they were fired from the same rifle. The rifle itself has never been found, but that doesn't really mean anything. He could have dug a hole anywhere on his property and put them in it. Like, he could have thrown them in a body of water. Remember, there's a whole hour unaccounted for, essentially, that he did something. What he was doing, we don't know. There was gunshot residue detected on his clothing and on a seatbelt, which indicates he had recently handled a firearm, which I will say, not that I'm trying to defend this scumbag, but I will say that wasn't quite as alarming to me, just because if you're in a gun-toting family, that's not, I don't feel like that would be an unusual thing to find gunshot residue, probably in a lot of locations. I don't necessarily think that would be the thing that would like peg this down. but it is something that they did find. And then the cell phone evidence, I feel like that video recording that Paul had at the dog kennels the night of the murders that captured Alex's voice was literally 30 minutes before the murders. So you're telling me he left and came back within 30 minutes? Or, I mean, just the timeline doesn't make sense. Him being on. Do you know what the defense said about that? Because I watched the trial because I was really invested in this case. Um, I watched the trial, but it's been so long since I watched it. I'm curious, did they have anything to say about that being Alex's voice on that video?
Yeah, so what they said was that they didn't deny that it was his voice, but what they said was that what he said, because he was questioned about it on the stand, is that he was just very scared and he lied.
Yeah,
mean I mean, that's about all he could say, right? Because it's kind
right.
of irrefutable. I don't think anybody would have believed him if he had said, "Yeah, that's not my voice." So he said, "Yeah, that's my voice. He was like, when the police were questioning me, I was just scared and I didn't know what to say or how to explain it. And I just wanted to make sure that they were investigating, like, essentially what it comes down to always is, well, he didn't want people spending time looking at him because he wanted, which is probably the truth, right? That he didn't want people suspecting and investigating him, but rather, trying to find what he said, the real perpetrators, who the real perpetrators were, because he
So
knew
where
it
did
made
he
him look bad.
say where did he say he was when they were murdered?
He said that he had driven over to Lickin on his mother,
Okay.
who was at I think a facility or something, but I think she's at, like, because she has Alzheimer's, so I think she was at a care facility,
Yep.
and somebody who was staff employee there did say that they saw him, but that he was there for a very short period of time. So
So he could have driven there from the 8:30 time slot. He could have driven there and driven back within that time to try to make an alibi.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think what he fudged was how long that
Mm.
visit was.
Yeah.
But he did, seemingly anyhow. I mean, the
The
person said
visit
he saw.
couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. I wonder how far that facility was from the dog kennels.
I don't remember it being that far of a drive. It was like maybe like a 15-minute drive or something.
Okay.
I can't remember, but
I'm Googling it because I need to know now.
I if I remember right, it was very within the realm of possibility for him to drive there, spend a little bit of time, and then come back and do the deed. I think the biggest thing that they didn't, like, really explain, though, is that it is, like, why were two guns used in the commission of the crime if it was just him? And because one of the things the defense did touch on this, because it kind of did, like, a little bit of a reenactment of, like,
Mhm.
where the shooter had to have been from, given the injuries on both Paul and Maggie. And it would have entailed somebody, and they were, like, talking about, like, the height of people and the height of Alex Murdaugh, and that it he would have had to have been, like, crouched down this way or that way, but what it came down to is that he had to have shoot one person from this direction and then come all the way over and shoot, I think Maggie was the second person to be shot, right?
Yeah.
Um, from another direction with a different firearm.
Well,
And I
he
think,
probably did that on purpose
I guess,
to make it look like it was 2 different assailants.
yeah,
Mm.
but if we're gonna just play devil's advocate, what if it was two different people?
I mean, I
Right?
guess that's always possible. But I
Like,
did find I just did some Googling. So the claim that he was visiting his mother, now this makes more sense, was like he never was at the dog kennels. And so then when they caught him on the video thing, he was like, "Oh, well, yeah, I did show up there." But then he tried to make it seem like he left after that and was gone the whole time, which now we know what he actually probably did is he went to visit his mother at the care facility. He got there at 8:30, would be my guess, that he got there oh, there we go. That he got there around 8:30 PM, and then he killed him about 30 minutes after he arrived.
yeah,
So then people were able to say, like, yes, he did come here to visit his mom,
right.
but the time frames are just off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel, and folks, if you're watching or on the replay, let us know in the comments. But do you think he did it? The jury was convinced. They didn't buy anything he had to say on the stand. His act was not compelling, and
Oh, it was so
like,
bad.
but like Wendy said, two things can be true. He can be sad that he lost his wife and son, but he could also, and he's been convicted of being the perpetrator of that loss. I mean, that was his own by his own doing. Um, but it's strange to think of it, but because he was when he was crying, some of it seemed real because I don't think he could probably cry on demand and have snot and stuff running out of his nose on command. So,
I don't
that's
know. I feel
that's
like
a
this
hard
guy is capable of anything. Like,
possibly, but I think that's a hard thing to fake.
yeah,
But I don't deny the possibility that you know um that he could be sad over it, but he's still like a murderer. So, like you said, two things can be true at the same time, even if, it's hard to hold those two as facts in our heads. Um,
that's because
but
we're not murderers.
right, exactly. Like we're not psychopaths. And,
Right.
I think it takes like very different wiring to, I think, like you said earlier, I think his motivation was not what the prosecution said to like garner sympathy. Maybe a little bit of that, but I think it's 100% what you said. He was like, she spends, Maggie spends a lot of money. There's gonna be probably a lot of money that needed to be thrown at Paul's, defense and his criminal
Mhm.
charges, and he just wanted to like maybe reduce his financial burden, claim some life insurance to help buoy his own upcoming financial burdens. And I think it all came down to the money for him. Like this guy
Yeah.
is all about the money. And it's just really crazy that anybody could. I mean, it takes a psychopath really to just think that, okay, I need money. What can I do?
Yeah.
Nobody normal, comes to the conclusion of let me
Let me murder my family?
yeah.
That seems
So
like a great way to get money. Like, it's just so yeah, again, I'm just fascinated with the whole concept of what in your head makes you think this is a good idea.
well, it seems to be his solution for all things though, because
Yeah. Oh, I'll just kill him.
well that, but he also was willing to have himself killed so that his last remaining
True.
son would have he just is very he's a psychopath. I mean, he just like okay, this is how he problem solves.
Right.
I don't know.
That's funny.
So I just kind of feel like that's this guy's like, that's the tool he feels like he has in his toolbox is let's let's do some murder and
Right.
you know. So that is Alex the case and trial of Alex Murdaugh. Do you want to show your cards and let folks know what you use?
Yeah, so I just posted a link in the chat and I'll add it to the description of this video later, like when we hang up. But I used some products from Waffle Flower that I have not got to use yet. So, well, I've used these before. This is just their regular coloring stencil and postage die. But I'm going to use these sentiments because I haven't finished these. So I'll finish these out. But this is the paper hug sentiments matching dies and stamp set,
I love
and
that.
it's just cute. Like miss your face and take your time, hugs for today, love for always. Just I really love these sentiments, and I think they're very sweet. And then this is their butterfly stencil that came out fairly recently. So that's what I used for both of these was the going this way. The butterfly stencil. And the colors I used, if you want to know, obviously black soot, salvaged patina for the backgrounds, picked raspberry, rusty hinge, carved pumpkin, and wilted violet. And I have to just tell you something kind of cute and funny. Before I before I was like doing stamping outside of the Stampin' Up world, because I think we've talked about this before. I was a Stampin' Up demonstrator for 14 years, and I left in July of last year. But I used to think when I was watching videos that people were saying pitched raspberry, like pitched, like throw or pitch something. And then when I got it, I was like, oh, it's picked raspberry.
That's too funny.
Yeah, just some little funny thing.
Awesome.
So what'd you do?
So I used Simon Hurley's Sky's the Limit. Yeah, Sky's the Limit with Spellbinders. So that is this, and then the cloud frame and clouds were from, I think it's actually from the Spellbinders Weekender Retreat, or it released after and was an extension. But it's this one. I don't have packaging for the other one. So that's my card. I'll drop links to everything in the description box afterwards.
Cute.
So big thank you to everybody who joined us live or caught the replay. I hope you'll hit that like button, subscribe if you like watching crafting while you listen to true crime. We don't have our May episodes scheduled yet, but
Wait, what did we say it would be? May 12th and May 12th and 29th? 26th. There you go.
Okay. So May 12th is going to be our next episode. So we're gonna cover. Should I say?
Sure, say it. The crazy lady.
we're gonna. They're all crazy, I guess.
They are all crazy, but she's a special kind of crazy.
Yeah. So join us on May 12th, everybody, for some Lori Daybell. She's
also known as Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow Daybell. Yeah.
Lori Vallow Daybell. She her case is interesting. She just actually finished her second trial, and I don't know where we'll be on. She does have an upcoming third trial, so by May 12th, I'm not sure where we'll be on that, but I'll cover from my side as much of all of her trials as I can.
And she's representing herself.
Yeah, that's
I cannot wait for you to cover this because I have so many questions. Like,
yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
I'll just put it that way. It's just really funny. But I know we're talking about like heavy cases and stuff, folks, but if we can't find humor in these things as spectators to true crime, then it's I don't know how you live with the fact that these things happen other than to find, your tribe and to talk about it like we are, and whatever humor we can find, then
it's a if you don't laugh you cry situation.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, for those of you who don't know anybody in law enforcement, I have friends in law enforcement, friends that are dispatchers, and they all have a very twisted sense of humor because it's how they survive it. Like, there is a um there is actually like validity to being able to laugh about things that are painful or like find a silver lining or find humor or whatever. Obviously, that probably wouldn't be the case for any of the victims' families. Like, um, so we in no way are making light of any of that because we know that there's great, great suffering behind all
Yeah.
of these cases.
And that's kind of why I feel like I have the easier job when we're doing this podcast, because I get to talk about the trial and the legal stuff, which is a little bit divorced from, the crime. And, when I say it's funny, it's the trial that I'm referring to. And it's a little bit of an easier statement to make. I'm
Right,
certainly not saying that the case or her actions in her commission of
right.
the crime, but it
Yeah.
bears saying, because I know some people think it's awkward to be laughing about things, but you know, that's we're not laughing about what has happened.
No, we're laughing about the absurdity of some of the things these people do. Like, what in your mind, like, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that's why we talk about this, and that's why people are interested in it, is because it is so odd, and we all do grapple with understanding why people do these things. So that's what makes it intriguing.
Yep.
So,
All right, friends. May 12th, mark your calendars, set your timers. We'll get the May live stream scheduled soon so that you can hit the notification so that you actually get an alert when we go live. But do hit that like button and please do share so that YouTube puts us out in front of other true crime enthusiasts and that we get more true crime mavens in these live streams with us. So with that, thanks everybody and have a good evening. Bye.
thank you. Bye.